$5 bought the poster. $5,000 every 3 years kept the real one alive. The real one was the Ferrari Testarossa, 12 cylinders lying flat, 4 camshafts, an open gate shifter that punished lazy hands, a Flat-12 engine that ran hot, sounded unlike anything else Ferrari ever built, and asked something real from the person behind the wheel. Most people never got close enough to feel any of that. They knew the shape from a bedroom wall. That distance between the image and the machine behind it is where this story begins. To understand why the Testarossa existed, go back a few years to the car it was replacing. The Berlinetta Boxer had been Ferrari's flagship since the early 70s. The 365BB and the 512BB were serious machines for their time, wide and low, with a Flat-12 engine mounted behind the driver. They were fast, dramatic, and deeply Italian in every way that phrase implies, which is to say they were also impractical, difficult to manage in traffic, and increasingly out of step with where regulations were heading. By the early 1980s, European emission standards were tightening, cooling requirements were changing, and Ferrari's engineers were looking at the Boxer platform with a clear-eyed view of its limitations. The biggest problem was heat. The Boxer's cooling system was never particularly elegant. A single front-mounted radiator, fed by a front air intake, was doing a job that was getting harder to do well as performance demands grew. As output climbed and regulations tightened, the math stopped working. The car needed bigger radiators, better airflow, a more efficient way to pull heat away from an engine producing serious power in a confined space. The solution was to move the radiators to the sides of the car, not as a styling gesture, as an engineering answer to a thermal problem. This is worth stopping on for a moment. The Berlinetta Boxer wasn't running out of talent. It was running out of breath. The front radiator was undersized for the heat the Flat-12 was producing, and there was nowhere left to put a bigger one. The front of the car was already full, so the engineers didn't patch the problem. They relocated it entirely. 2 radiators, 1 per side, fed by channels cut into the lower body. The heat problem became a packaging problem, and the packaging problem became a design brief. That decision changed everything about what the car would look like. When Pininfarina received the brief, the parameters were already set by the engineering team. The car needed to be wider to accommodate side-mounted radiators. It needed intake channels along the lower body to feed those radiators with moving air. The roofline needed to stay low to manage aerodynamic stability at high speed. Every major visual element of the Testarossa started as a constraint, not a choice. The strakes, those distinctive horizontal fins running along the lower body behind the doors, were there to channel airflow into the radiator intakes. Their width, their angle, their depth, all of it was determined by how much air the cooling system needed at speed. Pininfarina's job was to make that functional requirement look like it belonged on a Ferrari. They managed it so well that the strakes became the most copied design detail of the decade. The wide rear stance came from the same source. The Flat-12 engine cylinder banks measured roughly 900 millimeters across. No conventional engine architecture could match that power output in the same package without either greater length or greater height. The width was a direct consequence of the engine's horizontal layout, and the body followed. At 1,976 millimeters wide, the Testarossa was one of the widest production cars on the road when it launched. People assumed it was showmanship. It was thermodynamics. The name carried its own history. Testarossa means redhead in Italian, a reference to the red painted cam covers on the Flat-12 engine. Ferrari had used the name before, on the 250 Testarossa that dominated endurance racing in the late 1950s, winning Le Mans outright in 1958 and 1960. Bringing it back for the 1984 car was a deliberate signal. This was a serious machine with a serious lineage. So, before a single poster was printed, before a single episode of Miami Vice aired, the Testarossa was a solution to a specific set of engineering problems. The side strakes were cooling ducts. The width was a thermal requirement. The Flat-12 sitting behind the driver was chosen because its low, wide profile dropped the center of gravity in a way that no upright V configuration could match. Every element came from somewhere real. That part of the story never made it onto the poster. The engine sitting behind the driver in the Testarossa displaced 4.9 liters across 12 cylinders, arranged in a flat, horizontal configuration. In its original 1984 form, it produced 390 horsepower in European specification. Those numbers sound modest now, in an era where family sedans chase 500 horsepower without breaking a sweat. But in 1984, that output placed the Testarossa among the fastest production cars on the planet. 0 to 60 miles per hour arrived in around 5 seconds. The top speed approached 175 miles per hour. At a time when most sports cars were still working through the consequences of the 1970s oil crisis, those figures were serious. But the numbers aren't the point. The configuration is. A Flat-12 engine is exactly what it sounds like. 12 cylinders arranged horizontally, 6 on each side, lying flat rather than standing upright in a V. The practical consequence of that layout is that the engine sits very low in the car. There is a finer technical point worth understanding here. The typo F113 is not a true Flat-12 in the purest engineering sense. It is a 180-degree V12, meaning its connecting rods share crankshaft journals in pairs, the same way a conventional V engine does, rather than using the separate journals of a true flat crank configuration. Ferrari called it a Flat-12 in their own documentation, and functionally the distinction is invisible to the driver. But the shared journal crankshaft is why the engine's primary balance characteristics feel slightly different from a true horizontally opposed design. The crankshaft itself is a dense, heavy piece of machined steel, spinning at the center of 12 cylinders, all firing in a wide, low arc. That mass, positioned that low in the chassis, is the physical reason the car handles the way it does. You are not feeling electronics managing the weight. You are feeling the weight itself, correctly placed. The center of gravity drops in a way that an upright engine simply cannot achieve. The Testarossa's Flat-12 sat so low in the chassis that its profile, from the side, barely cleared the bottom of the door openings. What that means dynamically is balance. Real, physical balance. The kind that comes from mass positioned close to the ground, rather than from electronics compensating for mass positioned too high. In the Testarossa, the weight distribution between front and rear was close to even, and the low center of gravity gave the car a planted, stable quality at speed that drivers noticed immediately. It didn't feel light, it felt anchored. The engine also produced a sound unlike anything else Ferrari made before or after. 12 cylinders firing in a wide, flat arrangement create a mechanical note with a particular texture, a dense, layered, almost industrial quality underneath the high-frequency scream that Ferrari engines are known for. The Flat-12 doesn't shriek the way a V12 does. It builds, it accumulates. At full throttle, the sound fills the cabin and the surrounding air with something that feels less like noise and more like pressure. Getting to full throttle required working for it. The Testarossa used a 5-speed gearbox with an open gate shifter. For anyone unfamiliar with that term, the open gate is a defining feature of Ferraris from this era. The gear lever moves through an exposed metal gate, a physical grid of channels that guides each shift from one ratio to the next. The movement is deliberate and mechanical. There is weight to it, resistance, a tactile quality that forces the driver to be precise. Miss the gate and the gearbox tells you immediately. That clack of steel on steel is not incidental. It is the whole point. Every shift is a small act of commitment. The lever does not float. It does not click lightly into a detent. It drops with weight into a channel machined to accept it. The driver feels the gate walls, finds the slot, and pushes through. At high revs, with the Flat-12 building pressure behind the throttle, that moment of mechanical confirmation, lever seated, ratio selected, engine responding, is what separated driving a Testarossa from simply operating one. The gate itself is a physical grid of steel channels, open to view, with no housing around it. You can see the path each gear takes before you move the lever. Second gear requires a deliberate lateral push before the forward stroke. Third requires a return through the neutral plane. Every ratio has a geometry, and the driver learns the geometry through repetition until it becomes physical memory. Miss the gate under pressure, and the gearbox resists immediately. There is no ambiguity. The machine tells you precisely where you went wrong. Modern paddle shift systems have no equivalent sensation. The open gate shifter was not a comfort feature. It was an interface between the driver and the machine, one that required attention and rewarded skill. Getting a clean shift through the gate at high revs, feeling the lever slot into position, hearing the engine respond, that was part of what driving the Testarossa meant. The wide analog instrument cluster continued the same philosophy. Large dials, clearly marked, positioned to be read at a glance. No screens, no menus, no abstraction layer between the driver and the information the car was producing. The rev counter, the oil temperature, the water temperature, all of it immediate and physical. Heat management remained a genuine challenge, even with the side-mounted radiators solving the primary cooling problem. The wide rear section that housed the engine and the cooling system also trapped warmth around the driver's legs and lower body on long runs. This was not a car that pretended its engineering was invisible. It made itself known constantly, through sound, through heat, through the weight of the controls, through the effort required to operate it well. That directness was intentional. Ferrari's engineers weren't trying to isolate the driver from the machine. They were building a car where the driver and the machine were in continuous, unfiltered conversation. None of that conversation made it into the television show. The same year the Testarossa debuted in Paris, a television show premiered in the United States that would do more to shape the car's reputation than any road test ever written. Miami Vice arrived in September 1984 with a visual style that felt genuinely new. Pastel suits, neon light, South Florida heat, and a white Ferrari Testarossa driven by a detective named Sonny Crockett through streets that looked like a music video. Tens of millions of people watched it every week. Most of them had never considered buying a supercar. After watching Don Johnson slide that white Testarossa through a sun-soaked Miami night, they didn't need to own one. The image was enough. That's exactly where the problem started. What's worth knowing is that the Ferrari in Miami Vice's early seasons wasn't even a real Ferrari. The show originally featured a black Ferrari Daytona Spider, which was not a genuine Daytona convertible at all. It was a replica built on a Corvette chassis with a fiberglass body fitted on top. Look closely at the early season footage and the proportions are wrong. The wheelbase is too short. The door handles don't match. The exhaust note, for anyone who has heard a real Flat-12, is entirely absent. What the camera was selling as a Ferrari was a Corvette wearing a costume. Ferrari noticed, objected, and according to documented production history, provided genuine Testarossas to the show beginning in the 1986 season. So, the car most people associate with Miami Vice, the white Testarossa that defined the show's visual identity, replaced a fake Ferrari that Ferrari itself found objectionable. The real car arrived because Ferrari intervened. That detail never made it into the cultural memory. And the show didn't do the real car any favors either, at least not in terms of understanding it. Miami Vice didn't show the Testarossa being driven hard. It showed the car being seen. The Testarossa in that context was a prop, a visual shorthand for wealth, danger, and a particular kind of effortless cool. The camera loved the silhouette, the wide rear haunches, the strakes catching passing light, the low roofline moving through frame. Nobody on that show talked about Flat-12 cooling architecture. Nobody mentioned the open gate shifter or the thermal load the side radiators were solving. The car was there to look a specific way, and it did that job perfectly. The bedroom poster followed the same logic. By the mid-1980s, the Testarossa was one of the most reproduced automotive images in the world, sharing walls with the Lamborghini Countach across millions of children's bedrooms. The image that appeared most often was shot from a low rear three-quarter angle, the strakes filling the frame, the wide stance making the car look planted and aggressive even standing still. It was a beautiful photograph of a beautiful object. It communicated almost nothing about what the car actually was. Here's the number that puts it in perspective. Ferrari built approximately 7,177 Testarossas across the entire production run from 1984 to 1991. The Athena poster, sold through department stores and music shops for somewhere between $5 and $15, reached a buyer population that was certainly in the millions. The ratio of people who had this car on their wall to people who had it in their garage is probably the largest such ratio of any car ever made, And behind that ratio sits another set of numbers that the poster never mentioned. The timing belt service, 2 belts, 4 camshafts, partial engine extraction, ran $3,000 to $5,000 at a Ferrari dealer every 3 years without exception. The procedure required 40 or more hours of specialist labor. An owner who missed 2 service intervals wasn't just behind on maintenance. They were sitting on a deferred liability that could approach the car's entire market value in the early 2000s. When clean Testarossas were selling for $50,000 to $80,000, $5 bought the image. $5,000, recurring, bought the right to keep the machine alive. Most people who loved the poster never had to make that choice. The ones who did understood very quickly what kind of car they actually owned. The Countach comparison is worth a moment. Those 2 cars dominated the poster market for the same reasons. They were visually extreme in ways that photographs translated well. They looked fast without moving. But the Countach was always something of a performance in metal, a car built partly to provoke. The Testarossa was different. Underneath the drama was a coherent engineering philosophy, a genuine attempt to solve real problems with elegant solutions. The poster flattened all of that into surface. Ferrari's own marketing contributed to the shift. The advertising of that era leaned heavily on image and atmosphere, presenting the car as an object of desire rather than a machine with a specific technical character. The substance was still there, in the engineering, in the mechanical integrity of the Flat-12 platform, but Ferrari wasn't leading with it. The market was responding to something else. The cultural consequence was a kind of double erasure. The people who dismissed the Testarossa as 80s excess were reacting to the image. The people who celebrated it were doing the same thing from the opposite direction. Both groups were talking about the silhouette. Neither was talking about the engineering. The car kept running. The Flat-12 kept turning. But the conversation had moved somewhere else entirely. The Testarossa didn't stand still. Ferrari revised it twice over the following decade, and both revisions were serious ones. The 512 TR arrived in 1992 with more power, a reworked suspension, and a completely redesigned interior. The Flat-12 now produced 428 horsepower, up from 390. The suspension geometry was sharpened. The interior, long the most criticized aspect of the car, was rebuilt from scratch with a level of finish that reflected how much the supercar market had changed in 8 years. By almost every measurable standard, the 512 TR was a better car than the original Testarossa. The chassis was more precise. The power delivery was stronger. The cabin felt like it belonged on a car at that price point. Ferrari hadn't changed the fundamental architecture, but they had refined everything built on top of it. The F512M followed in 1994. The M stood for Modificata. For the first time in the lineage, the changes were visible from the outside. The pop-up headlamps, which had become something of a period detail by that point, were replaced with fixed units behind polycarbonate covers. The change wasn't aesthetic. Pedestrian safety regulations were tightening across Europe and North America, penalizing the rigid leading edges of pop-up housings in the closed position. Engineers had also concluded that fixed headlamps behind polycarbonate covers offered optically superior beam patterns and, critically, zero delay. A pop-up mechanism takes the better part of a second to fully open. At 170 miles per hour, that second represents a significant distance traveled in the dark. Fixed headlamps illuminate instantly. The F512M also pushed output to 440 horsepower through further camshaft and intake revisions, the highest the Flat-12 ever reached in road car form. In 501 units, the F512M was produced and then quietly retired. It was the scarcest of the 3 variants, the fullest expression of what the platform could be, and the last of its kind. 501 cars to close out 23 years of continuous mid-engine, Flat-12 Ferrari flagship production. That is not a large number. The people who recognized what they were buying at the time understood exactly what was ending. Ferrari never returned to the Flat-12 after the F512M went out of production in 1996. The engine that had defined the company's flagship cars across 2 decades, chosen specifically for its low center of gravity and its unfiltered mechanical character, was retired without ceremony. It simply stopped appearing in new cars. The reason wasn't a failure of the engine. It was a shift in what Ferrari believed performance should feel like. Through the early 1990s, the broader automotive world was changing in ways that had deep consequences for performance car design. Electronic management systems were becoming genuinely useful. Traction control, which had been experimental and unreliable in the late 80s, was maturing into something that worked. Anti-lock braking was moving from motorsport into road cars. The idea that electronics could manage the gap between a driver's skill and a car's limits was becoming central to how manufacturers thought about the whole enterprise. Ferrari watched this shift and made a choice. The 550 Maranello, which replaced the F512M in 1996, pointed clearly in a new direction: a front-mounted V12, a more refined chassis, a driving experience that was faster and more accessible, but also more managed. The philosophy behind it was different: performance that felt inevitable rather than earned. Electronics not compensating for driver error so much as raising the ceiling of what any driver could achieve. That was a reasonable position. It reflected real thinking about what most buyers of expensive cars actually wanted, but something was traded away in the process. The Testarossa, in all three of its forms, had asked something of the person behind the wheel. The weight of the controls, the precision the open gate required, the heat and the sound and the physical presence of the Flat-12 running at full load, none of that was filtered or managed. The car communicated constantly, and the driver had to respond. That exchange was demanding and direct and entirely analog. It was specific to this machine and to this era. When Ferrari moved on, they moved on from that exchange as much as from the engine configuration. The 512TR and the F512M had kept that philosophy alive longer than the market probably demanded. But by the mid-90s, the direction was clear. The era of unmediated mechanical drama was closing. The Flat-12 lineage that had begun with the Berlinetta Boxer in 1973 ended 23 years later, with 501 examples of the F512M rolling out of Maranello. What that meant for the car's legacy wouldn't become clear for another decade or two. Something interesting happened to the Testarossa once the nostalgia settled and the irony faded. The collector market found it, and the collector market understood something the poster culture never did. Clean examples, unmolested cars with documented service histories and matching numbers now trade well above their original list price. The F512M in particular has climbed steadily, recognized for what it always was: the fullest and final version of a platform that will never be replicated. Well-maintained Testarossas have crossed $200,000 at major auction houses, a long way from the $50,000 to $80,000 range they sat at in the early 2000s when deferred timing belt services made them feel like liabilities rather than assets. What the collector market is paying for is not nostalgia, it's irreplaceability. The Flat-12 is gone. Ferrari has no plans to return to that configuration. The engine that defined the company's flagships across 2 decades exists now only in the cars that were built, and the number of those cars is finite and shrinking. The F512M ended production at 501 units. That is not a large number. Ferrari Classiche, the company's own certification program based in Maranello, will inspect a car against its original build records and issue formal documentation of authenticity. At auction, the presence or absence of that document measurably affects the sale price. The market has done the math on scarcity. The Testarossa sits at a specific moment in automotive history. The last Ferrari, where the engineering itself was the spectacle. Not electronics setting the ceiling. Not a system managing what the driver could feel. The machine, unfiltered, asking something of the person behind the wheel and offering something extraordinary in return. That exchange doesn't exist in the same form anymore. What replaced it was faster, more capable, and more forgiving. None of that is wrong. But the specific quality of the Testarossa, that density of mechanical experience, the sound, the heat, the weight of the gate, is gone. A car this significant spent most of its cultural life as a background prop. That's the quiet tragedy of it. $5 bought the poster. $5,000 every 3 years kept the real thing alive. That gap is the whole story. The Testarossa was never a disposable object. It was a machine designed to be serviced, maintained, and driven hard for decades. The Flat-12 sitting behind the driver didn't ask for your admiration. It asked for your attention, regular timing belt intervals, proper oil, a specialist who understood what 4 camshafts and 2 interference belts actually meant. Give it that, and it would run for 30 years. Neglect it, and it would tell you immediately. That philosophy, building something complex enough to demand real care, is what separated this era from everything that followed. The cars that came after were faster and more forgiving, but forgiving means the machine is compensating for you. The Testarossa never compensated for anyone. That's what the poster never showed. That same tension runs through the next video. In 1998, Toyota faced an impossible choice with the Land Cruiser 100 between uncompromising build quality and a market moving toward comfort. Click that video next.